Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The Japanese don't care to, the Chinese wouldn't dare to. Hindus and Argentines sleep firmly from 12 to 1. But Englishmen deter stars, siesta. In the Philippines they have lovely screens to protect you from the glare. In the Malay states there are hats like plates which the British...
I wouldn't say that Jeeves was actually smirking, but there was a definite look of quiet satisfaction on his face, and I suddenly remembered what this sickening scene with Gussie had caused me to forget, viz., that the last time I had seen him he had been on his way to the telephone to ring up the secretary of the Junior Ganymede Club. I sprang to my feet eagerly. Unless I had misread that look, he had something to report. "Did you connect with the sec, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir, I have just finished speaking to him." "And did he dish the dirt?" "He was most informative, sir." "Has Spode a secret?" "Yes, sir." I smote the trouser leg emotionally. I should have known better than to doubt Aunt Dahlia. Aunts always know. It's a sort of intuition. Tell me all. "I fear I cannot do that, sir. The rules of the club regarding the dissemination of material recorded in the book are very rigid." "You mean your lips are sealed?" "Yes, sir." "Then what was the use of telephoning?" "It is only the details of the matter that I am precluded from mentioning, sir. I am at perfect liberty to tell you that it would greatly lessen Mr. Spode's potentiality for evil if you were to inform him that you know all about Eulalie, sir." "Eulalie?" "Eulalie, sir." "That would really put the stopper on him?" "Yes, sir." I pondered. It didn't sound like much to go on. "You sure you can't go a bit deeper into the subject?" "Quite sure, sir. Were I to do so, it is probable that my resignation would be called for." "Well, I wouldn't want that to happen, of course." I hated to think of a squad of butlers forming a hollow square while the committee snipped his buttons off. "Still, you really are sure that if I look Spode in the eye and spring this gag, he would be baffled? Let's get this quite clear. Suppose you're Spode, and I walk up to you and say, 'Spode, I know all about Eulalie.' That would make you wilt?" "Yes, sir. The subject of Eulalie, sir, is one which the gentleman occupying the position he does in the public eye would, I am convinced, be most reluctant to have ventilated." I practised for a bit. I walked up to the chest of drawers with my hands in my pockets, and I said, "Spode, I know all about Eulalie." I tried again, waggling my finger this time. And then I had to go with folded arms, and I must say it still didn't sound too convincing. However, I told myself that Jeeves always knew. "Well, if you say so, Jeeves, then the first thing I had better do is find Gussie and give him this life-saving information." "Sir?" "Oh, of course you don't know anything about that, do you? I must tell you, Jeeves, that since we last met the plot has thickened again. Were you aware that Spode has long loved Miss Bassett?" "No, sir." "Well, such is the case. The happiness of Miss Bassett is very dear to Spode. And now that her engagement has gone foot, for reasons highly discreditable to the male contracting party, he wants to break Gussie's neck." "Indeed, sir." "I assure you. He was in here just now speaking of it, and Gussie, who happened to be under the bed at the time, heard him. With the result that he now talks of getting out of the window and going to California, which of course would be fatal. It is imperative that he stays on and tries to effect a reconciliation." "Yes, sir." "He can't effect a reconciliation if he is in California." "No, sir." "So I must go and try to find him, though, mark you, I doubt if he will be easily found at this point in his career. He's probably on the roof, wondering how he can pull it up after him." My misgivings were proved abundantly justified. I searched the house assiduously, but there were no signs of him. Somewhere, no doubt, Totley Towers hid Augustus Finknottle, but it kept its secret well. Eventually I gave it up and returned to my room and stuck my victuals if the first thing I beheld on entering wasn't the man in person. He was standing by the bed, knotting sheets. The fact that he had his back to the door and that the carpet was soft kept him from being aware of my entry till I spoke. My "Hey!" a pretty sharp one, for I was aghast at seeing my bed thus messed about, brought him spinning round, ashen to the lips. "Woof!" he explained. "I thought you were Spode." Indignation succeeded panic. He gave me a hard stare. The eyes behind the spectacles were cold. He looked like an annoyed turbot. "What do you mean, you blasted Wooster?" he demanded. "By sneaking up on a fellow and saying 'hey' like that? You might have given me heart failure." "And what do you mean, you blighted fink-nottle?" I demanded in my turn. "By mucking up my bed linen after I had specifically forbade it. You have sheets of your own. Go and knot those." "How can I? Spode is sitting on my bed." "Is he?" "Certainly he is, waiting for me. I went there after I left you, and there he was. If he hadn't happened to clear his throat, I'd have walked right in." I saw that it was high time to set this disturbed spirit at rest. "You needn't be afraid of Spode, Gussie." "What do you mean I needn't be afraid of Spode? Talk sense." "I mean just that. Spode, qua menace, if qua is the word I want, is a thing of the past. Owing to the extraordinary perfection of Jeeves' secret system, I have learned something about him which he wouldn't care to have generally known." "What?" There you have me. Well, when I said I had learned it, I should have said that Jeeves had learned it. And unfortunately, Jeeves's lips are sealed. However, I am in a position to slip it across the man in no uncertain fashion. If he attempts any rough stuff, I will give him the works. I broke off, listening. Footsteps were coming along the passage. "Ah," I said, "someone approaches. This may quite possibly be the blighter himself." An animal cry escaped Gussie. "Ah! Lock the door!" I waved a fairly airy hand. "It will not be necessary. Let him come. I positively welcome this visit. Watch me deal with him, Gussie. It will amuse you." I had guessed correctly. It was Spode. No doubt he had grown weary of sitting on Gussie's bed and felt that another chat with Bertram might serve to vary the monotony. He came in as before without knocking, and as he perceived Gussie, uttered a wordless exclamation of triumph and satisfaction. He then stood for a moment, breathing heavily through his nostrils. Like that. He seemed to have grown a bit since our last meetings, being now about 8'6", and had my advices in re getting the bulge on him proceeded from a less authoritative source, his aspect might have intimidated me a good deal. But so sedulously had I been trained through the years to rely on Jeeves's lightest word that I regarded him without a tremor. Gussie, I was sorry to observe, did not share my sorry confidence. Possibly I had not given him a full enough explanation of the facts of the case. Or it may have been that, confronted with Spode in the flesh, his nerve had failed him. At any rate, he now retreated to the wall and seemed, as far as I could gather, to be trying to get through it. Foiled in this endeavour, he stood looking as if he had been stuffed by some good taxidermist, while I turned to the intruder and gave him a long, level stare, in which surprise and hauteur were nicely blended. "Well, Spode," I said, "what is it now?" I had put a considerable amount of topspin on the final word, "what is it now?" to indicate displeasure. But it was wasted on the man. Giving the question a miss like the deaf adder of Scripture, he began to advance slowly, his gaze concentrated on Gussie. The jaw muscles, I noted, were working as they had done on the occasion when he came upon me toying with Sir Watkin Bassett's collection of old silver, and something in his manner suggested that he might at any moment start beating his chest with a hollow drumming sound, as gorillas do in moments of emotion. "Ha!" he said. Well, of course, I was not going to stand any rot like that. This habit of his of going about the place saying "ha" There's the one thing that has got to be checked, and checked promptly. Spode, I said sharply, and I have an idea that I rapped the table. He seemed for the first time to become aware of my presence. He paused for an instant and gave me an unpleasant look. Well, what do you want? I raised an eyebrow or two. What do I want? I like that. That's good. Since you ask, Spode, I want to know what the devil you mean by keeping coming into my private apartment, taking up space which I require for other purposes, and interrupting me when I am chatting with my personal friends. Really, one gets about as much privacy in this house as a striptease dancer. I assume that you have a room of your own. Get back to it, you fat slob, and stay there. I could not resist shooting a swift glance at Gussie to see how he was taking all this, and was pleased to note on his face the burgeoning look of worshipping admiration, such as a distressed damsel of the Middle Ages might have directed at a knight on observing him getting down to brass tacks with a dragon. I could see that I had once more become to him the old daredevil Wooster of our boyhood days, and I had no doubt that he was burning with shame and remorse as he recalled those sneers and jeers of his. Spode also seemed a good deal impressed, though not so favourably. He was staring incredulously, like one bitten by a rabbit. He seemed to be asking himself if this could really be the shrinking violet with whom he had conferred on the terrace. He asked me if I had called him a slob, and I said I had. A fat slob? A fat slob. It's about time, I proceeded, that some public-spirited person came along and told you where you got off. The trouble with you, Spode, is that just because you have succeeded in inducing a handful of half-wits to disfigure the London scene by going about in black shorts, you think you're someone. You hear them shouting, "Heil Spode!" and you imagine it is the voice of the people. That is where you make a bloomer. What the voice of the people is saying is, "Look at that frightful ass Spode swanking about in footer bags. Did you ever in your puff see such a perfect perisher?" He did what is known as struggling for utterance. Oh, he said. Ha! Well, I will attend to you later. And I retorted, quick as a flash, will attend to you now. I lit a cigarette. Spode, I said, unmasking my batteries. I know your secret. I know all about... All about what? It was to ask myself precisely that question that I had paused. For believe me or believe me not, in this tense moment, when I so sorely needed it, the name which Jeeves had mentioned to me as the magic formula for coping with this blister had completely passed from my mind. I couldn't even remember what letter it began with. It's an extraordinary thing about names. You've probably noticed it yourself. You think you've got them, I mean to say, and they simply slither away. I've often wished I had a quid for every time some bird with a perfectly familiar map has come up to me and said, "Hello, Worcester," and had me gasping for air because I couldn't put a label on him. This always makes one feel at a loss, but on no previous occasion had I felt so much at a loss as I did now. "All about what?" said Spode. Well, as a matter of fact, I had to confess, I've forgotten." A sort of gasping gulp from upstage directed my attention to Gussie again, and I could see that the significance of my words had not been lost on him. Once more he tried to back, and as he realised that he had already gone as far as he could go, a glare of despair came into his eyes. And then abruptly, as Spode began to advance upon him, it changed to one of determination and stern resolve. I like to think of Augustus Finknottle at that moment. He showed up well. Hitherto, I am bound to say, I had never regarded him highly as a man of action. Essentially the dreamer type, I should have said. But now he couldn't have smacked into it with a prompt gusto if he had been a rough-and-tumble fighter on the San Francisco waterfront from early childhood. Above him, as he stood glued to the wall, there hung a fairish-sized oil painting of a chap in knee-breeches and a three-cornered hat, gazing at a female, who appeared to be chirruping to a bird of sorts. A dove, unless I'm mistaken, or a pigeon. I had noticed it once or twice since I had been in the room, and had indeed thought of giving it to Aunt Dahlia to break instead of the infant Samuel at prayer. Fortunately, I had not done so, or Gussie would not now have been in a position to tear it from its moorings and bring it down with a nice wristy action on Spode's head. I say fortunately, because if ever there was a fellow who needed hitting with oil paintings, that fellow was Roderick Spode. From the moment of our first meeting, his every word and action had proved abundantly that this was the stuff to give him. But there is always a catch in these good things, and it took me only an instant to see that this effort of Gussie's, though well meant, had achieved little of constructive importance. What he should have done, of course, was to hold the picture sideways so as to get the best out of the stout frame, instead of which he had used the flat of the weapon, and Spode came through the canvas like a circus rider going through a paper hoop. In other words, what had promised to be a decisive blow had turned out to be merely what Jeeves called a gesture. It did, however, divert Spode from his purpose for a few seconds. He stood there blinking, with the thing round his neck like a ruff, and the pause was sufficient to enable me to get into action. Give us a lead, make it quite clear to us that the party has warmed up, and that from now on anything goes, and we Woosters do not hang back. There was a sheet lying on the bed where Gussie had dropped it when disturbed at his knotting, and to snatch this up and envelop Spode in it was with me the work of a moment. It is a long time since I studied the subject, and before committing myself definitely I should have to consult Jeeves, but I have an idea that ancient Roman gladiators used to do much the same sort of thing in the arena, and were rather well thought of in consequence. I suppose a man who has been hit over the head with the picture of a girl chirruping to a pigeon, and almost immediately afterwards enmeshed in a sheet, can never really retain the cool, intelligent outlook. Any friend of Spode's, with his interests at heart, would have advised him at this juncture to keep quite still, and nor stir, till he had come out of the cocoon. Only thus, in a terrain so liberally studded with chairs and things, could a parlour have been avoided. He did not do this. Hearing the rushing sound caused by Gussie's exiting, he made a leap in its general direction, and took the inevitable toss. At the moment when Gussie, moving well, passed through the door, he was on the ground, more inextricably entangled than ever. My own friends advising me would undoubtedly have recommended an immediate departure at this point, and, looking back, I can see that where I went wrong was in pausing to hit the bulge which, from the remarks that were coming through at that spot, I took to be Spode's head, with a china vase that stood on the mantelpiece not far from where the infant Samuel had been. It was a strategical error. I got home all right, and the vase broke into a dozen pieces, which was all to the good, for the more of the property of a man like Sir Watkin Bassett that was destroyed, the better. But the action of dealing this buffet caused me to overbalance. The next moment a hand coming out from under the sheet had grabbed my coat. It was a serious disaster, of course, and one which might well have caused a lesser man to feel that it was no use to go on struggling. But the whole point about the Woosters, as I have had occasion to remark before, is that they are not lesser men. They keep their heads. They think quickly, and they act quickly. Napoleon was the same. I have mentioned that at the moment when I was preparing to inform Spode that I knew his secret, I had lighted a cigarette. This cigarette, in its holder, was still between my lips. Hastily removing it, I pressed the glowing end on the ham-like hand, which was impeding my getaway. The results are thoroughly gratifying. You would have thought that the trend of recent events would have put Roderick Spode in a frame of mind to expect anything and be ready for it, but this simple manoeuvre found him unprepared. With a sharp cry of anguish, he released the coat, and I delayed no longer. Bertram Wooster is a man who knows when and when not to be among those present. When Bertram Wooster sees a lion in his path, he ducks down a side street. I was off at an impressive speed, and would no doubt have crossed the threshold with a burst which would have clipped a second or two off Gussie's time, had I not experienced a head-on collision with a solid body which happened to be entering at that moment. I remember thinking as we twined our arms about each other that at Totley Towers, if it wasn't one thing, it was bound to be something else. I fancy that it was the scent of eau de cologne that still clung to her temples that enabled me to identify this solid body as that of Aunt Dahlia, though even without it, the rich hunting field expletive which burst from her lips would have put me on the right track. We came down in a tangled heap and must have rolled inward to some extent, for the next thing I knew we were colliding with the sheeted figure of Roderick Spode, who, when last seen, had been at the other end of the room. No doubt the explanation is that we had rolled north-north-east and he had been rolling south-south-west, with the result that we had come together somewhere in the middle. Spode, I noticed, as reason began to return to her throne, was holding Aunt Dahlia by the left leg, and she didn't seem to be liking it much. A good deal of breath had been knocked out of her by the impact of a nephew on her midriff, but enough remained to enable her to expostulate, and this she was doing with all the old fire. "What is this joint?" she was demanding heatedly. "A loony bin? Has everybody gone crazy? First I meet Spinkbottle racing along the corridor like a mustang, then you try to walk through me as though I were thistledown, and now the gentleman with the burnous has started tickling my ankle, a thing that hasn't happened to me since the York and Ainsty Hunt Ball of the year 1921. These protests must have filtered through to Spode and presumably stirred his better nature, for he let go, and she got up, dusting her dress. "Now then," she said, somewhat calmer, "an explanation, if you please, and a categorical one. What's the idea? What's it all about? Who the devil's that inside the winding sheet?" I made the introductions. "You've met Spode, haven't you? Mr. Roderick Spode, Mrs. Travers." Spode had now removed the sheet, but the picture was still in position, and Aunt Dahlia stared at it wonderingly. "What on earth have you got that thing round your neck for?" she asked. Then, in a more tolerant vein, "Wear it if you like, of course, but it doesn't suit you." Spode did not reply. He was breathing heavily. I didn't blame him. Mind you, in his place I would have done the same. But the sound was not agreeable, and I wished he wouldn't. He was also gazing at me intently, and I wished he wouldn't do that either. His face was flushed, his eyes were bulging, and I had the odd illusion that his hair was standing on end, like quills upon the fretful portentine, as Jeeves once put it when describing to me the reactions of balmy Fotheringay Phipps on seeing a dead snip, on which he had invested largely, come in sixth in the procession at the Newmarket Spring meeting. I remember once, during a temporary rift with Jeeves, engaging a man from the registry office to serve me in his stead, and he hadn't been with me a week when he got blotto one night and set fire to the house and tried to slice me up with a carving knife. Said he wanted to see the colour of my insides, of all bizarre ideas. And until this moment I had always looked on that episode as the most trying of my experience. I now saw that it must be ranked second. This bird of whom I speak was a simple, untutored soul, and Spode a man of good education and upbringing, but it was plain that there was one point at which their souls touched. I don't suppose they would have seen eye to eye on any other subject you could have brought up, but in the matter of wanting to see the colour of my insides, their minds ran on parallel lines. The only difference seemed to be that whereas my employee had planned to use a carving knife for his excavations, Spode appeared to be satisfied that the job could be done all right with his bare hands. "I must ask you to leave us, madam," he said. "But I've only just come," said Aunt Dahlia. "I'm going to thrash this man within an inch of his life." It was quite wrong tone to take with the aged relative. She has a very clannish spirit, and, as I have said, is fond of Bertram. Her brow darkened. "You don't touch a nephew of mine." "I'm going to break every bone in his body." "You aren't going to do anything of the sort. The idea! Here, you." She raised her voice sharply as she spoke the concluding words, and what had caused her to do so was the fact that Spode at this moment made a sudden move in my direction. "Hey, you!" Considering the manner in which his eyes were gleaming and his moustache bristling, not to mention the gritting teeth, and the sinister twiddling of the fingers, it was a move which might have been expected to send me flitting away like an adagio dancer. and had it occurred somewhat earlier, it would undoubtedly have done so. But I did not flit. I stood where I was, calm and collected. Whether I folded my arms or not, I cannot recall, but I remember that there was a faint, amused smile upon my lips. For that brief monosyllable, you, had accomplished what a quarter of an hour's research had been unable to do, viz., the unsealing of the fount of memory. Jeeves's words came back to me with a rush. One moment the mind a blank, the next the fount of memory spouting like nobody's business. It often happens this way. 1 minute, Spode, I said quietly, just 1 minute, before you start getting above yourself. It may interest you to learn that I know all about ukulele. It was stupendous. I felt like one of those chaps who press buttons and explode minds. If it hadn't been that my implicit faith in Jeeves had led me to expect solid results, I should have been astounded at the effect of this pronouncement on the man. You could see that it had got right in amongst him and churned him up like an egg whisk. He recoiled, as if he had run into something hot, and a look of horror and alarm spread slowly over his face. A bit like that. The whole situation recalled irresistibly to my mind something that had happened to me once up at Oxford, when the heart was young. It was during 8th week, and I was sauntering on the riverbank with a girl named something that had slipped my mind, when there was the sound of barking, and a large hefty dog came galloping up, full of beans and buck, and obviously intent on mayhem. And I was just commending my soul to God and feeling that this was where the old flannel trousers got about 30 bobs worth of value bitten out of them, when the girl, waiting till she saw the whites of its eyes, with extraordinary presence of mind, suddenly opened a coloured Japanese umbrella in the animal's face, upon which it did 3 back somersaults and retired into private life. Except that he didn't do any back somersaults, Roderick Spode's reactions were almost identical with those of this nonplussed hound. For a moment he just stood gaping. Then he said, "Oh?" Then his lips twisted into what I took to be his idea of a conciliatory smile. After that he swallowed 6, or it may have been 7 times, as if he had taken aboard a fishbone. And finally he spoke, and when he did so, it was the nearest thing to a cooing dove that I've ever heard, and an exceptionally mild-mannered dove at that. "Oh, do you?" he replied. "I do. I do," I replied. If he had asked me what I knew about her, he would have found that me stymied, but he didn't ask. How did you find out?" "I have my methods." "Oh?" he said. "Ah," I replied, and there was silence again for a moment. I wouldn't have believed it possible for so tough an egg to sidle obsequiously, but that was how he now sidled up to me. There was a pleading look in his eyes. "I hope you will keep this to yourself, Wooster. You will keep it to yourself, won't you, Wooster?" "I will." "Oh, thank you, Wooster. Provided," I continued, "that we have no more of these extraordinary exhibitions on your part of... what's the word?" He sidled a bit closer. Of course. I'm afraid I have been acting rather hastily." He reached out a hand and smoothed my sleeve. "Did I rumple your coat, Wooster? I'm sorry, I forgot myself. It shall not happen again." "It had better not. Good Lord, grabbing fellows' coats and saying we're going to break chaps' bones. I've never heard of such a thing." I know. I was wrong." "You bet you were wrong. I should be very sharp at that sort of thing in future, Spode." Yes, I understand." "I have not been at all satisfied with your behaviour since I came to this house. The way you were looking at me at dinner. You may think people don't notice these things, but they do." Of course. "Calling me a miserable worm." "I'm sorry I called you a miserable worm, Wooster. I spoke without thinking." "Always think, Spode. Well, that is all. You may withdraw." "Good night, Wooster." "Good night, Spode." He hurried out with bowed head, and I turned to Aunt Dahlia, who was making noises like a motorcycle in the background. She gazed at me with the air of one who has been seeing visions. And I suppose the whole affair must have been extraordinarily impressive to the casual bystander. Well, Albie... Here she paused. Fortunately, perhaps, for she is a woman who, when strongly moved, sometimes has a tendency to forget that she is no longer in the hunting field, and the verb, had she given it utterance, might have proved a bit too fruity for mixed company. Bertie, what was all that about? Waved a nonchalant hand. Oh, just put it across the fellow, merely asserting myself. One has to take a firm line with chaps like Spode. Who is this ukulele? Ah, there you've got me. For information on that point, you will have to apply to Jeeves, and it won't do any good, because the club rules are rigid and members are permitted to go only just so far. Jeeves, I went on, giving credit where credit was due, as is my custom, came to me some little while back and told me that I had only to inform Spode that I knew all about ukulele, to cause him to curl up like a burnt feather. And a burnt feather, as you have seen, was precisely what he did curl up like. And to who the above may be, I haven't the foggiest. All I can say is that she is a chunk of Spode's past, and, one fears, a highly discreditable one. I sighed, for I was not unmoved. One can fill in the picture for oneself, I think, Aunt Dahlia. The trusting girl who learned too late that men betray. The little bundle, the last mournful walk to the riverbank, the splash, the bubbling cry. I fancy so, don't you? No wonder the man pales beneath the tan a bit at the idea of the world knowing of that. Aunt Dahlia drew a deep breath. A sort of soul's awakening look had come into her face. Good old blackmail. You can't beat it. I've always said so, and I always shall. It works like magic in an emergency. Bertie, she cried, do you realise what this means? Means, old relative? Now that you've got the goods on Spode, the only obstacle to your sneaking that cow creamer has been removed. You can stroll down and collect it tonight. I shook my head regretfully. I had been afraid she was going to take that view of the matter. It compelled me to dash the cup of joy from her lips, always an unpleasant thing to have to do to an aunt who dandled one on her knee as a child. No, I said, there, you're wrong. There, if you will excuse me saying so, you are talking like a fathead. Spode may have ceased to be a danger to traffic, but that doesn't alter the fact that Stiffy still has the notebook. Before taking any steps in the direction of the cow creamer, I have got to get it. But why? But I suppose you haven't heard. Madeline Bassett has broken off her engagement to Spink Bottle. She told me so in the strictest confidence just now. Well then, the snag before was that young Stephanie might cause the engagement to be broken by showing old Bassett the book. But if it's broken already... I shook the bean again. My dear old faulty reasoner, I said, you miss the gist by a mile. As long as Stiffy retains that book, it cannot be shown to Madeline Bassett. And only by showing it to Madeline Bassett can Gussie prove to her that his motive in pinching Stiffy's legs was not what she supposed. And only by proving to her that his motive was not what she supposed can he square himself and effect a reconciliation. And only if he squares himself and effects a reconciliation can I avoid the distasteful necessity of having to marry this Bully Bassett myself. No, I repeat, before anything else, I have got to have that book. My pitiless analysis of the situation had its effect. It was plain from her manner that she had got the strength. For a space she sat chewing the lower lip in silence, frowning like an aunt who has drained the bitter cup. Well, how are you going to get it? I proposed to search her room. What's the good of that? My dear old relative, Gussie's investigations have already revealed that the thing is not on her person. Reasoning closely, we reach the conclusion that it must be in her room. Yes, but, you poor ass, whereabouts in her room? It may be anywhere. And wherever it is, you can be jolly sure it's carefully hidden. I suppose you haven't thought of that. As a matter of fact, I hadn't. And I imagine that my sharp must have revealed this, for she snorted like a bison at the water trough. No doubt you thought it would be lying out on the dressing table. All right, search her room if you like. There's no actual harm in it, I suppose. It will give you something to do and keep you out of the public houses. I, meanwhile, will be going off and starting to think of something sensible. It's time one of us did. pausing at the mantelpiece to remove a china horse which stood there and hurl it to the floor and jump on it, she passed along. And I, somewhat discomposed, for I had thought that I had got everything neatly planned out, and it was a bit of a jar to find that I hadn't, sat down, began to bend the brain. The longer I bent it, the more I was forced to admit that the flesh and blood had been right. Looking round this room of my own, I could see at a glance a dozen places where, if I had had a small object to hide, like a leather-covered notebook full of criticisms of old Bassett's method of drinking soup, I could have done so with ease. Presumably the same conditions prevailed in Sniffy's lair. Sniffy? I mean, of course, Stiffy. In going thither, therefore, I should be embarking on a quest well calculated to baffle the brightest bloodhound, let alone a chap from childhood up who has always been rotten at Hunt the Slipper. To give the brain a rest before having another go at the problem, I took up my gooseflesher again. And by Jove, I hadn't read more than half a page when I uttered a cry. I had come upon a significant passage. "Jeeves," I said, addressing him as he entered a moment later, "I have come across a significant passage." "Sir?" I saw that I had been too abrupt and that footnotes would be required. "In this thriller I'm reading," I explained. "But wait. Before showing it to you, I would like to pay you a stately tribute on the accuracy of your information, Spode. A hearty vote of thanks, Jeeves. You said the name Eulalie would make him wilt, and it did. Spode qua menis. Is it qua? Yes, sir, quite correct. I thought so. Well, Spode qua menis is a spent egg. He has dropped out and ceased to function." "That is very gratifying, sir." "Most. But we are still faced by this Becker's book, that young stiffy continuously in possession of the notebook. Continues. Oh, by this time my tongue was getting in such a twist. That notebook, Jeeves, must be located and re-snitched before we are free to move in any other direction. Aunt Dahlia has just left in despondent mood because, while she concedes that the damned thing is almost certainly concealed in the little pimple's sleeping quarters, she sees no hope of fingers being able to be laid upon it. She says it may be anywhere, and is undoubtedly carefully hidden." "That is the difficulty, sir." "Quite. But that is where this significant passage comes in. It points the way and sets the feet upon the right path. I'll read it to you. The detective is speaking to his pal, and the they refers to some bounders at present unidentified who have been ransacking a girl's room, hoping to find the missing jewels. Listen attentively, Jeeves. They seem to have looked everywhere, my dear Postlethwaite, except in the one place where they might have expected to find something. Amateurs, Postlethwaite, rank amateurs. They never thought of the top of the cupboard, the thing that any experienced crook thinks of at once, because, note carefully what follows, because he knows it is every woman's favourite hiding place. I eyed him keenly. You see the profound significance of that, Jeeves. If I interpret your meaning aright, sir, you are suggesting that Mr. Finknottle's notebook may be concealed at the top of the cupboard in Miss Byng's apartment? Not may, Jeeves, must. I don't see how it can be concealed anywhere else. But the detective is no fool. If he says a thing is so, it is so. I have the utmost confidence in the fellow, and am prepared to follow his lead without question. But surely, sir, you are not proposing... Yes, I am. I am going to do it immediately. Stiffy has gone to the Working Men's Institute and won't be back for ages. It's absurd to suppose that a gaggle of village mothers are going to be sated with coloured slides of the Holy Land, plus piano accompaniment, in anything under 2 hours. So now is the time to operate while the coast is clear. Gird up your loins, Jeeves, and accompany me. Well, really, sir. And don't say, well, really, sir. I have had occasion to rebuke you before for this habit of yours of saying, well, really, sir, in a soupy sort of voice, when I indicate some strategic line of action. What I want from you is less of the well, really, sir, and more of the buckling to spirit. Think feudally, Jeeves. Do you know Stiffy's room? Yes, sir. Then ho for it. I cannot say, despite the courageous dash which I had exhibited in the above slab of dialogue, that it was in any too bobbish a frame of mind that I made my way to our destination. In fact, the nearer I got, the less bobbish I felt. It had been just the same the time I allowed myself to be argued by Roberta Wickham into going and puncturing that hot water bottle. I hate these surreptitious prowlings. Bertram Wooster is a man who likes to go through the world with his chin up and both feet on the ground, not to sneak about on tiptoe with his spine tying itself into reef knots. It was precisely because I had anticipated some such reactions that I had been so anxious about Jeeves accompanying me and lending me moral support, and I found myself wishing that he would buck up and lend a bit more than he was doing. Willing service and selfless cooperation were what I had hoped for, and he was not giving them me. His manner was, from the very start, betrayed an aloof disapproval. He seemed to be disassociating himself entirely from the proceedings, and I resented it. Owing to his aloofness and this resentment on my part, we made the journey in silence, and it was in silence that we entered the room and switched on the light. The first impression I received on giving the apartment the once-over was that, for a young shrimp of her shaky moral outlook, Stiffy had been done pretty well in the matter of the sleeping accommodation. Hotley Towers were one of those country houses which had been built at the time when people planning a little nest had the idea that a bedroom was not a bedroom unless you could give an informal dance for about 50 couples in it, and this sanctum could have accommodated a dozen stiffies. In the rays of the small electric light up in the ceiling, the bally thing seemed to stretch for miles in every direction, and the thought that if that detective had not called his shots correctly, Gus's notebook might be concealed anywhere in these great spaces was a chilling one. I was standing there hoping for the best when my meditations were broken in upon by an odd gargling sort of noise, something like static and something like distant thunder, and to cut a long story short, this proved to proceed from the larynx of the dog Bartholomew. He was standing on the bed, stropping his front paws on the coverlet, and so easy was it to read the message in his eyes that we acted like two minds with but a single thought. At the exact moment when I soared like an eagle onto the chest of drawers, Jeeves was skimming like a swallow onto the top of the cupboard. The animal hopped from the bed and, advancing into the middle of the room, took a seat, breathing through his nose with a curious whistling sound, and looked at us under his eyebrows like a Scottish elder rebuking sin from the pulpit. And there, for a while, the matter rested.